Hi everyone, my name is Sam. I run the D&D Newbie Sessions community, and I am here today with Baloo. Baloo, I contacted on Twitter recently through some just seeing some interesting tweets that he had posted. And Baloo, sounds like you're a professional DM. You've got some YouTube channel and some content that you're making. Do you want to give a little introduction for the people listening?
Sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Baloo. Once upon a time, a very smart man asked me if I had a nickname, and I said, a guy called me Baloo once, and he goes, oh, good, that's your name now. And that man was real intelligent, and I didn't have the heart to argue with him, so I guess that's my new name. Uh, I'm a professional host. I dislike the word GM or DM for another time, but I don't think those terms are essentially comprehensive enough and or good enough, depending on who you want to ask, to cover something like a table talk, like Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, so I do that professionally. Right now it pays a car payment. That's exciting.
Nice.
Among other things, I have a YouTube channel where I talk to cool people about the table, cool people that make table stuff about the table. I think I'm the first person to ever interview all of the Pondsmiths, who you might be familiar with because they made the tabletop that inspires Cyberpunk 2077, which is in the news right now a lot.
Cool.
They are also, side note, they are fantastic people. Sam reached out to me on Twitter and said, hey, that is a ridiculous number of players. Do you want to talk about it? And I said, yeah, you bet. And here we are.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So to give some context for the viewers here, there was a tweet that got posted and I saw Baloo's response and he basically said, hey, I've run, what are some of the biggest games you've run? And you mentioned running one for 28 people. I think you even mentioned it was for not only D&D, but maybe other platforms as well.
Yes.
And I mean, personally, the biggest game I think I've ever run is 8 people. And so when I saw 28, I was like, oh my gosh, how is that possible? How do you manage that? And would you even do it again? Exactly. Yeah. How does that not take a week to run or, whatever? So that's what we're going to dive into today. And I think the first place we should start is just a little background. Like, how did it happen? How did you get into a 28-person game?
So I had friends is a strong word. I hopefully you can't tell now, but I was incredibly socially awkward in high school, and there were a collection of kids who wanted to play D&D. That's what we had at the time, anyway, and I agreed, and we played with that many, which was nuts. Because in high school, something I didn't really have perspective on at the time. In high school, you're packed with hormones and high energy, and even if you're intelligent, you're just dumb other times.
Yep.
And nobody feels confident enough to speak their mind in a made-up setting. Nobody. And it was a lot. Since then, though, I've run for that many, and it's not a big deal.
Wow. Okay.
Efficiency is the key thing. This is going to sound rude, but in a time where you have this many people, in a setting with that many people, 10 seconds on your turn. You don't need to act out your whole turn in 10 seconds, but you need to decide what you're going to do and start doing it in 10 seconds. Yeah. If you're going to host for a lot of people, a lot being defined as any more than 2 than hours you are going to play, which is to say, if you're going to play with 5 hours, if you have more than 7 people, put this rule into effect, you'll have a better time. Though there'll probably be some arguments in the beginning. As soon as your turn ends, it has started again. You have all that extra time to decide what you're going to do because everybody else gets their turn before you go again. While it's true that players will do I'm sure somebody will do something that will drastically change the map in front of you, which in turn might change what you're going to do. This is how come, like, when you go to a drive-through, you should know what you want, and then, like, 2 backup options. Should they go, hey, we're out of chicken nuggets today?
Yeah. So did you have to establish those rules pretty strictly up front? Because I feel like even if you tell people that stuff, they tend to just be in the moment, completely forget it,
The hardest part was not the 10-second rule. The hardest part was delivering and not sounding like a butt face. That was definitely the hardest part.
Yeah. Okay. Well, were you satisfied at the end of a 28-person game? Like, did it feel like a lot was accomplished, or did it just feel like a mess of stuff?
It felt like both. for me.
Okay.
It felt like we did a lot because I tend to move really fast. I haven't been happy with the way that D&D has mechanically formed basically since it formed.
Okay.
Original, I like original D&D. There's almost, so my favorite system in the whole world is XDM, which I did not know of at the time. It's 156 pages, 155 and a half of them are ideology. That remaining half a page is mechanics.
Wow. Okay.
If your system is more than 30 pages long, it's unnecessarily complicated. And D&D is very, very much like that. The 5e PHP is what, 300 pages? That's insane. At the time, third edition is what was popular. And I don't know if you've played it, but third edition is awful granular. It's like a 4-page character sheet, and half of one of them is just skills and the various ranks in those skills that you can have.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't played third edition, who has played fifth edition tends to break down the mechanical bonuses into advantage and disadvantage for the most part. That's it. You might get a +1 sword or something like that, but for the most part, whenever you're adjusting the die in a noticeable way, it's because you have advantage or disadvantage. With mathematically, depending on who you ask, it's either a +3 or a +5. I think it's the DMG has a section where you might, an optional mechanic, where you might throw out, as opposed to rolling 2 dice, adding +5 to your roll. Mechanically, that is a better option, though you'll find that lots of players just like to roll 2 dice. At the time, as opposed to third edition, which you'll have +7, but it'll come from 7 individual different places, which is to say 7 different things giving you +1. While that is the same amount of total math of saying that's same total gain as saying you have an object here, one thing that gives you +5, and 5 little things over here that each amount to +5. In the player brain, that's still an extra half a second to process that, particularly if they're new. So it's a lot. It was a lot. We had a good time, but would I go back and have agreed to do it again if I had known it was going to go? Probably for the experience, but I would have gone into it knowing that it was not going to be as much fun.
Okay.
It's complicated.
So do you consider D&D that's being complicated, that as we add more players on, does it just kind of get increasingly sluggish? Are there other systems that you're aware of that are really efficient at high levels, like high amounts of players?
I think it depends. I get that one a lot. Is lower play or higher play better? I don't think either one of those things is objectively the right answer. I think it comes down to the players at the table. If you've got a bunch of high energy Hanks, right? Those are different power levels and different overall just energy expenditures. They're going to take up more brain space in the room than a bunch of slow Steves. But slow Steves, if they're too slow, you're going to have to poke them with a stick in order to get them to make a decision. And that is its own kind of drain. So just like everything else at the table, I think it comes down to not the number of players, but the players that are physically present, like the players you have. And I know that for, hey, let's pull a bunch of online randos and then make a table, that doesn't really help. And that's not fair. And the world we live in is busier every day, and it's not fair. But I think it comes down to the players themselves as opposed to the number of players.
Okay, so and then was that so the 28 person, or just any of those really big games that you've run, did they ever continue on, or was that sort of a one-time deal?
The first one was a one-time deal, but other ones have run for months. One of them ran for something like a year.
Wow. Okay. And
it was a good time.
Is the management of having games that large pretty daunting?
Not for me, but I don't keep a lot of notes.
Okay.
Let me pull up my notes for my last table, my upcoming table actually on Thursday. It has 2 players in it. This is one of the most exhaustive note cards I currently have, and this table will run for as long as they want to play. The current goal is until life gets in the way. We have a psychokinetically powered sentient piece of draconic cheesecake. I have his character's name, how many hit points he has, and a couple of things about him that matter. He's looking for the other 7 pieces of who he is. He has a fear of anything that would melt him. He's immune to fire, little things like that. I have an identical stat card for the other player character. That's it.
Wow.
The only math I have on there is the character name, the player name, hit points, and armor class. That's it. I don't keep any other notes. Instead, when we sit down to play again, I ask the players to do a recap. This is for two reasons. One, because it lets me take that extra second to breathe. But more importantly, they will tell you what they think is important because it's what they remember.
Interesting.
And sometimes you'll get really lucky and they'll say, hey, that shopkeeper who's clearly the bad guy sent us on a mission. And you're like, I didn't think he was going to be the bad guy. Well, I guess he is now. Right? Like, your players will tell you how they view the world and what was important to them, because that'll be what they remember. The boring stuff they didn't care about, they forgot.
Interesting. So do you do a lot of your stories then just kind of off the cuff? I mean,
oh yeah,
because it sounds like if I were to approach that, I would have a story built in, say, Google Docs or something. I've written it out, and if they mention something like the shopkeeper's definitely the bad guy, I don't know if that would necessarily change my campaign. But I don't know. Maybe that's not the correct approach.
No. See, for me, I've heard that breaking down to the living narrative and the living world. I'm definitely over here. Mm-hmm. So a living world is, there's a forest with werewolves in it, and the players march off into the forest. Whether or not they're going there to deal with the werewolves or not, it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. They end up in contact with the werewolves. The players, they hear a shriek in the woods. There's a little girl, and your players go, you know what? I don't care. That tells you a lot about them. Mm-hmm. But in a living world, that girl is going to die to werewolves, unless your players get involved. Mm-hmm. In a living narrative, which is to say the world is a static thing. It exists independent of the players. They can change it to some extent. That depends on how much agency you gave them. But the world exists essentially whether or not they play or not. You could transition all of your world details into a book. A living narrative, which is the one I tend to do. If in that same situation, players they hear the shriek of a little girl, and they go, okay, there are no werewolves. Doesn't matter. They only existed long enough to see if they catch the player's attention. If they do, great. Now they exist. If they didn't, whatever. Wow, because the world exists entirely to serve the players. I'm not a host who has a world sitting in a box somewhere waiting to drop players into it. I have lots of friends who do that. And I don't get it. Huh. I don't see the point in world building without the players. It's there for them. I don't understand.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating because, so personally, I actually find myself on the other end, which is that I like world building and I like thinking that the world is this real thing. And if the players don't do something, there are consequences to that. So this is actually very interesting to me. Like it's like a fundamentally different way to approach it that I hadn't actually considered before.
No, don't get me wrong. Consequences are completely, those two things aren't necessarily attached for me. So mm-hmm. when I sit down with players, I'm gonna be like, hey, session 0 time. I'm gonna ask them a bunch of questions about their character, like, do you have a rival? Do you have a childhood friend? Being an adventurer is a pain in the ass. Surely being a baker is an easier plan. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose this road? Yeah. Did you do it on purpose? Did you have another option? Did the local baron burn your farm to the ground? Right? Like, why quest? There's got to be an easier option. Mm-hmm. And during that step, during session 0 when we character build, we're also going to talk about things like, do you guys want meaningful consequences? Because some people just want to show up and play a superhero game mm-hmm. and have no real consequences, have a power fantasy. And if you're okay with hosting that, then you shouldn't punish them just because you assume they want it. They might not.
Yeah.
Similarly, the railroad is not necessarily bad. I had a player for a while who works all day in a high energy creativity field. So when he comes to play, he doesn't want to make moral decisions. He wants me to grab him by the nose and just drag him down the railroad track. That's it. He actually wants that.
Yeah.
So, which was not something I encounter every day. So I think whether or not you have what is essentially punishment, consequences are do this thing or this thing happens. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whether or not that exists that can exist in a world whether or not you do the living narrative or living world. Mm-hmm. Like in the living narrative one, I have a table where they got involved with a town where everybody on this side of the line is wealthy and they do whatever they want. and everybody on this side of the line is poor, and they absolutely do whatever these people tell them to do, and not really in an employed sense of way, more like a social slavery avenue.
Okay.
That became filled with moral choice because the players cared.
Mm-hmm.
But if they wander over to the next town and it's goblins versus kobolds and they don't care, they don't care. Because and for me, this works because moral imperative, it only works if you care. In a video game, like in Skyrim, Skyrim's a popular video game. In Skyrim, if you get involved in the Civil War, you don't have to, but if you do, eventually they're going to ask you to pick a side. If actually, come to think of it, Skyrim will not hold you accountable in any way, so that is a terrible example. Infamous is a better example. Infamous is a better example on the PS3.
Okay.
Infamous will make you pick a side. They'll present you with karmic decisions. Good guy over here, bad guy over here, right? And how the city treats you changes with that decision.
Okay.
But that only matters because the player cares. You have to, at least a little bit. Not emotionally. If you don't care emotionally, care mechanically. If you play a bad guy, the town will throw rocks at you for the entire game. Like they will make your life more difficult. Similarly, if you get towards the end of the game and you play a good guy, all the people will get between you and the bad guys, which on the one hand is helpful. On the other hand, it makes it awfully hard to hit the bad guy with lightning without cooking one of the NPCs, which in turn gets you bad guy points because now you've shot him in the back of the head, right? Yeah. So there has to be some reason for your players to give a crap, whether it's mechanical or emotional. If neither of those things happen, then you're presenting a moral choice that they don't actually care to be invested in.
Okay, interesting. And is that approach? That approach sounds like it would work better for a much larger set of players too, or like a large game. Whereas my default approach kind of having an established world, if I had tried to have 28 people come in and play in that is going to be a disaster for me, I feel like, because it's going to be so hard to try to fit everything, and all the decisions are going to be kind of bumping into the story elements I've created. Would you agree with that or no?
See, I don't know, because I don't know what players you have.
True, I guess that's a hard question.
I don't know how much world detail are we talking? Lots of hosts who come up with worlds have gods and town names and notable NPCs, but do you know who are there libraries? Who pays for them? Are there books? Who makes them? Like little Baloo. A friend of mine asked me the other day, I printed up a much more defined stroke. I tend to do big broad stroke world painting and worry about the rest of it later when the players show that they give a crap. So he asked me, I sent him this big, it's like 27 pages, and those are just the questions, not the answers. That's the template for questions, broken down by subcategory: art over here, social over here, science over here. And I run him through it, and he goes, where's the question that asks what the average family unit is like? What? I cannot think of a game that I've ever been in where my experience would have been enriched had I known that the normal orc family unit was the nuclear one. Yeah. I can't. What? But he genuinely cares about that kind of thing. He really wants to know. Yeah. And for him, that will enrich his gameplay experience. So if I host a table for him, I'm actually hosting one right now. We engage. He humored me. We're doing the minimal mechanics, big broad stroke thing, and he's having fun. And he's confused a little bit that he's having fun. But I promised him next time, if he wants to give it another shot, I'll do the crunchy thing with all the pre-existing blah. Yeah. But I'll do it. And in that case, I'm going to need to know what the normal family unit is across the various societies, assuming that they're different.
Yeah. See, I think I kind of personally latch on to that stuff because I feel like a little bit of pressure in terms of wanting to do it. Like, what if the players ask me those types of questions and I can't in the moment think up what the logical response, so there's some nervousness there about not knowing,
Oh yeah. See, for me, that my biggest, if I had a tip for that, my single biggest tip for that would be have a list of names. It is easily the place that I stumble the most. I got lucky around, a year ago? I had a player ask me what the name of this NPC they ran into is. And this little town, it's a squat little hamlet, thatched roof, everything's covered in mud and a bit soggy.
Mm-hmm.
The people look a little sludgy, right? And no one's clean, no one's old, and there are no children.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't care about that. They said, "What's it called?" And I went, Bobtown. And they said, "How come?" And I have this NPC come up with a beer in his hand and introduce himself as Bob, village leader, because he's lived here the longest. And I got lucky because they loved it. Bobtown was a place they fought to save on no less than 3 occasions.
Mm-hmm.
However, I got lucky. They deserved better. So I made a list of names that I just go, all right, they asked for an NPC. Here's one. And I scratch it off and write, like in my new note card, what that person's name is and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Until such time that they are no longer important, which is entirely, might just be this one time.
Mm-hmm.
The players tend to ask me that just to rattle me because they know I'm no good with names. They don't actually care. Like,
yeah. Huh. Okay. Interesting. And okay, so let's jump back again to some running these bigger games. I'm curious if you have any sort of unique insights, or like, do you, or if let's say someone who'd never done that before decided to try and challenge himself by running a really big game, what sort of things could they expect to learn or be challenged by?
So I'm not a big fan of initiative. You don't need it. You never did. It's a leftover from old war games. It's a pain in the ass. I'm not a fan. And no edition of D&D or anything like it ever needs initiative section in it ever again.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you're going to run a table that big, some preordained, this is whose turn it is next, is a good idea. I don't generally go for that. But in something like that, I would set that out and I wouldn't roll dice for it unless you're only going to roll dice for it once.
Mm-hmm.
If you can play in person, ICRPG has this great system where you put the host in a chair, you put all the numbered every player gets a chair, right, like normal, and then where the players sit, they go left to right around the host. That's it. That never changes. All of the bad guys go when it's the host's turn. That's it. Oh. Since the players get to choose where they sit, this gives them the agency to decide who goes when.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as even if they get up and rearrange who sits where, they did it. They can see each other all the time. If you're going to have a lot of people at once, having a regular turn order that is easy to keep track of is a good idea. Whether that's initiative tracker, an electronic initiative tracker, mm-hmm. Paper clips on top of your screen with people's names on it, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of thing I usually go for, but with that many people, letting everybody know who's up next is a good idea. Mm-hmm. And if you can keep that, if you have the capacity to put everybody's names like who's up next in a sports game, if you can do that with everybody, do it. Mm-hmm. Because it'll let your players know how many more turns they have before they need to know what they're doing next. Mm-hmm. And in turn, how likely it is. Like after a while, they'll know, okay, he tends to blow things up. He tends to just stand there and do nothing, right? After a while, players will know what other players are more likely to screw up whatever their plan is.
Mm-hmm. Do you keep that turn order? Is that just when we're talking about combat scenarios, or is that even like when they're exploring a town or something?
That one comes down to more the players, but in a situation where you have many players, I would stay in turn order outside of combat. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which is hard to do because outside of combat, what you're doing has a certain number of time. I would have I want to climb to the top of the rogue wants to climb to the top of the tower from the outside. Mm-hmm. Why? Because he's a rogue and he wants to. I mean, it's a rich person's house. He's going to break off. It's an NPC. He assumes he's going to be fine. Yeah. And you're going to have him make 1 or 2 checks, maybe. Mm-hmm. But that's what he's going to do until he's done. Whereas the fighter's going to go to the tavern and pick a bar fight and try and make new friends. Because that's how big dumb fighters make friends, right? They hit each other. Mm-hmm. Whereas the druid's going to sit in the backyard and just wait for the other guys to settle up. That's it. Each of those things takes a drastically different amount of time. So outside of combat, which usually has a regimented time window, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever system you're playing, outside of combat can be difficult. You essentially have to get your players to agree that they're taking one action, which may or may not combine their movement, independent of how long that takes. You have to get the players to psychologically buy into that everybody gets a turn is more important than that they achieve the same amount of stuff.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because it seems almost like if you had a big game like that and you kind of kept that circle going, it would be a different game of D&D or whatever game you're playing, because it actually feels like it could be potentially less collaborative in a sense, because like when it's a smaller group, you have a lot of crosstalk where it's like, I'm going to do this. Oh, I'll help you do that. Or I'm going to go and stand and keep lookout. But if you're 12 players away from that person and you're going in order, it's a little bit more individualized. Like, I'm doing this.
That does tend to happen with a large group of players. You still get that crosstalk, but you get it in little bubbles. These 4 players, those 3 players, these 2 guys, like that. And unfortunately, it does. I would just deliberately crack them up and spread them around to develop new crosstalk. I don't care that they're talking amongst each other as long as they heard what we said. I mean, have you ever tried to boss around an entire auditorium? It's kind of like that. You're not going to get everybody's attention all at once.
Yeah.
But if they walk away with the gist of what you said as a public speaker, that's probably the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably keep little brief nuggets of things for them to hear.
But given the choice, today I would much rather run several smaller tables. I'm all for running 8, 10, right? But I do think there's a magic number between just a one-on-one player experience, because then it absolutely becomes about them. So you can zoom everything in and make this really intimate's probably the wrong word, but kind of very much focused about them and their exploits, and maybe they get a sidekick. There's something you don't get in D&D every day, right? That can be a lot of fun. And 3 and 4 players, I always find that I have better experience unless it's just one with an even number of players. I don't know why. Just I would rather split a group of 24 into 2 groups of 12. We could host on the same day, just not at the same time.
Yeah. Interesting. And then what about the level variation? I mean, I find that just because of the mechanics of D&D, like lower level players, they're just easier to run because they have less abilities. It feels a lot of times more about just the human element of them problem solving, and not so much, let me read this quest or let me read this spell. No. Let me read this other spell. I've got this class feature,
So mechanically, I tend to enjoy lower level play. But only because the players, right, like you said, have less mechanical options. And I tend to find that when players don't have anything, whether that's because they don't have anything to begin with or because they've burned through all their spell slots already, they tend to get more creative, and that's where the good stuff is, where they role play and get creative and ask questions about the environment.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think higher level play is harder to design for, but it always feels unnecessarily spongy. Like how a lot of video games, when you turn it up to apocalyptic mode, all that really happens is the enemy's hit points totals go up. So you have to hit them longer and run out of bullets sooner, unless you're a really good shot and you use headshots, which in assuming your game does high extra damage with a headshot up to and including a 1-hit kill, then you're forcing the player to get better aim or not make it to the end of the scene, the end of fight, with enough bullets to carry them into the next fight. But in D&D, that's not really something you can do. So it feels, I don't know, it always feels like I'm padding the capacity of the bad guys just to compensate, to drain them of energy anyway, and to drain them of spell slots. And that's just, I don't tend to use spell slots anymore. But that I would much rather, like in the new Hades video game, when you finish it, there's a new set of options you can get that'll let you tweak your enemies. Your enemies, every enemy in the game now has 1 hits. The first hit they take, they just didn't feel it. I don't care how hard you hit them. The 2 hits, they just didn't feel it, period. Now you have strategic options, though. If you take a weapon that goes and does 2 quick little taps, they're not going to hit them. You're not going to feel it anyway, no matter how hard you hit them.
Yeah.
Or do you ignore the enemy and move on? Do you find another way? Like there's traps all over that game. Do you get the bad guys to take those 2 hits by themselves? Like you can kind of play with them. I think if you're going to have higher level play, one, ask your players what they want. Do they want to be mechanically threatened all the time? There's something to be said for letting your players just shit kick a goblin down a hallway. Just let them feel powerful from time to time.
Yeah.
I should probably open up with this. I don't like balanced encounters. They don't make any sense. Think about the last badass movie fight scene you saw, or the last badass video game fight scene you saw. I promise it wasn't fair, and that has a lot to do with how come it was so badass when the good guy won. Because balance is silly. Stop swinging for it. You don't need it. Don't kill your players for giggles, right?
Yeah.
But don't worry so much about balance.
Yeah.
Players, they're smarter than you think they are. When they're under the gun, they'll get creative.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, no, I don't think higher level play is harder to design for. I feel like after a while, I'm using the same techniques to build for it. The bad guy takes more hits to damage. Why? Because the player hits harder.
Yeah. I also was curious about, because this kind of comes up here and there. It's like DM anxiety, GM anxiety. When you do a bigger game like that, is it like cranked up because you're such a focus for a lot of people, or is it more like there's so many conversations going on and it's actually not so bad?
So it's both, really. Okay. For me. It's when you have enough players that are cross-talking amongst themselves, yeah, you tend to get a little less spotlight on you, but I don't tend to notice that. I mean, I notice that they're talking about themselves, but it doesn't give me any slack. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I still know that then I have doubts like, well, are they bored? Oh no, one of them yawned. Oh crap. Yes. like that never goes away. So instead, I bank on their honesty. I ask every player I ever play with, no matter how long or how briefly we played, if they had fun. And a lot of the time, we'll have players go, "Yeah, it was good." Okay. Now I'm gonna sound like a jerk because I asked you for a compliment. At least it looks like I did.
Yeah.
And now I'm gonna ask you to be more specific. Now it looks like I'm fishing. I'm not. I'm gonna ask a specific question instead. When were you least bored? That sort of thing. Did you have fun is an open-ended question.
Yeah.
Ask a closed question. What did you think of that NPC? Right. Be specific. The goblins that attacked you, was that engaging? And if they go, yeah, all right. I mean, don't listen to just what they said. Listen to how they said it. They go, yeah, the goblins were cool. They weren't cool enough. If they'll go, oh wow, yeah, that goblin that came out of the tree almost killed me. That was cool. It was cool. Do that again. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, that is a great point. It's easy to hear someone say something and think that that's the only thing that they could have said. But there's you can imagine like, well, they could have said that. They could have said right. It was amazing, but they said it was good. That's a great insight. Yeah.
Years ago, I was playing Ratchet and Clank 2. I still play that game. I'm a big fan.
Cool.
And in the developer diary for that game, Ted Price, who is the CEO of Insomniac, who is going to be on my show one of these days,
nice.
Came out and asked his team. Like a developer diary, they're talking. He goes, "Hey, the weapons guy, the guy on the team who designs big, like 3D printed weapons of Ratchet's big, ridiculous weapons. He'll come out. Hey guys, what do you think about this?" And if they go, "All right, it's cool," he goes, "No," and he leaves. He goes, smashes that model, I assume, builds a new one. And comes back and goes, "Hey guys, what do you think?" And they go, "Oh, what is it?" That one's going in the game, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And that had a huge impact on me as a kid.
Okay.
Even people who don't speak very well or have poor vocabulary still know the different. Still will use the different phrases to describe when they really are happy with what happened and when they're just kind of saying something because you asked them a question.
Yeah, I've definitely. It's interesting that I've run not a ton of games, but a fair amount of games at this point. I've seen a lot of different people come through my games, and I feel like I'm still not any better at judging whether or not they truly had a good time or something. Because I'll be watching, as we go, and I'm like, well, like you said, oh my gosh, that person yawned. Like, oh, is he bored? But then gets to the end, and they're like, oh my god, I had such a good time, and I'm like, did you? I'm actually surprised. I thought you seemed a little
I get that
bored,
all the
you know?
time. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, people have lives, right? I need to remind myself, all right, that we're here today, but earlier today they worked, right? They
Yeah.
have kids.
Yep.
Maybe they have a dying in-law. Who knows,
Yep.
right? And if you have the opportunity, I would get to know your players away from the table.
Mm-hmm.
Ask how they're doing, and not about play. Just say, hey, how's your day going? And maybe they tell you, they're like, hey, whoa, just here to roll dice,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have a couple players like that. They do not want to bond at all,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. But if they're up for it, do that. Get to know them a little bit, and you'll get to what in cold reading is called the baseline. You'll get to see what they're feeling without them actually having to tell you,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really useful skill. Yes. Are you psychologically analyzing your players? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You absolutely are.
Mm-hmm.
But you're doing it for their benefit,
Mm-hmm.
which in theory hopefully takes the creep out of it. You're doing it for their benefit.
Yeah.
And sometimes players don't know how to tell you what they want to tell you, and I don't know about you, but I don't like feeling stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not in a position to tell you the answer to a question that you asked, I'm gonna offer. I might try and do the best I can, but I might duck out of the question and just not get back to you. And in the world of Discord and text messages and email, ghosting, that's a we have a label for it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not because they don't want to talk to you. It's because they want to and they don't know how, and they don't want to feel stupid.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can tell them that, right? You can be like, hey, look, I don't want you to feel stupid. Talk to me anyway. But it's really easy to hear that as they just said that and then I'll feel stupid anyway. Like if I feel like I'm going to feel stupid when I answer you, that really doesn't have anything to do with you. That has everything to do with how I'm going to feel about what I said. So you offering up assurance that you won't think I'm stupid does not help. You know what I mean? Like I'm still going to feel dumb. Anyway, so yeah, pay attention to your players and how look around the table, and the next time a player goes, oh, whatever that was, do that again. Keep a note of that. That player likes that thing. I had a player for a while that would go nuts, and he would always talk about, hey guys, remember the time I jumped off the ship into water that had basically the goo from Pirates of Darkwater in it?
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, remember that time I took a swing at a golem? Remember that time I attacked 50 guards because I had just temporarily become immortal and I wanted to test that? And every time we talked about it, I thought for a second, I was like, okay, he's living for the crazy, stupid Rambo moment. But he's not. He doesn't care about that because he doesn't care about the success. He only cares that he got to do an extreme thing. If he was immortal, but he also got turned into jelly and scooped into a bucket that he'll now be in forever. So moral of the story, immortality does not keep you safe. But the point is that through careful understanding, it occurred to me that he didn't care about winning.
Mm-hmm.
He cared about having the opportunity to do something out of an 80s action movie.
Mm-hmm.
So every hour or so, I made sure there was just something ridiculous for him to do, and he had a great time. He went through characters like some people go through underwear, but he had a great time.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose a big piece of that too is probably doing it and then being able to kind of relive it and talk about it and share that, right?
Yeah, because he can just say, hey guys, remember I did this thing, and then his friends get to razz him and go, yeah, and did you walk away from that? And you go, shut up. Right?
That's awesome. Jumping back to the anxiety thing, I'm just curious if you have any other, because for whatever reason that does come up a fair amount, and I've noticed it with the in our community we do that dungeon master training type stuff, and there definitely is a barrier that seems to exist, which is this real anxiety about all of the expectations around being a dungeon master and trying to do it right, and all the questions and worry and do you have anything that would help someone or?
Maybe. So I'm just gonna come out and make a bunch of enemies right now. Do not care about the book. There, I said it. Do not worry about what the dice said or a sheet of paper says or a book says. That entire book, there's a passage, I don't care what edition we're talking about, there's a passage in there somewhere from Wizards of the Coast that says, hey, do whatever works for you and your group. If this idea we've come up with doesn't work for you, don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say, Homebrew is read as written. Homebrew is raw all the time. Those that you don't have to play in the Forgotten Realms. Orcs don't have to be short and stubby and black. Elves don't have to be graceful. Dwarves don't have to have a thing for stone. Although in my experience, for some reason, players tend to get extra fussy when you alter dwarves. I don't know what it is. Like I had a table where I edited every race, and no, I mean, halflings were like communist nutcases, and elves they had no forest anymore, so they were the beings with wanderlust that the humans usually are.
Okay.
And the humans for most campaign settings are human centric. This one was not. It was dwarf centric, but they were mostly mindless Nietzschean drones piloted by one much larger, not drone Nietzschean dwarf who commanded them all through psychokinetic powers. And I caught so much crap for that. Oh, and they ate rocks. They ate rocks, not mind rocks. They ate rocks because they were in the way. They were digging for a specific thing.
Yep.
And one day a dwarf got some in his mouth, and he went, "Hey, our teeth can crunch that without any difficulty. That is mud. I have my mouth on me all the time. Then it's more effective than carrying all this mining equipment."
Yeah.
Because they were logical to a fault. So and I caught so much crap for that. Anyway, so if you're gonna have the right way to play is the way that works the best for your group. So if your players say, "Hey, we all want to play fighters," then they all look like they actually want to play a fighter. Like even if it just looks like they want to play all bards and have a battle of the bands one-off, do it. Don't worry about party balance. That you don't need that. Just do whatever sounds fun for your friends. There isn't some magical line or goal you have to meet. And if you're nervous about being new, as opposed to, dropped the cat. If the question isn't, if the fear isn't, I'm playing wrong. If the fear is, how do I not suck? When you first play, you probably do. But you get players that are brand new because they also suck. So they'll think you're amazing, right? And then you'll grow as a group.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, and I've definitely noticed personally since I've been running more and more games recently with the meetup groups and things like that, the amount of moving from like running once a week to running multiple times a week and stuff like that has actually helped me a lot too.
That comes up for a lot of people that hosting multiple tables a week can be exhausting. I cannot recommend this book enough. Shameless plug for somebody who was not me. Sly Flourish makes Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And he has, I think the opening sentence in this book is, it's in the preparing for your game section. There we go. Prepare what benefits your game. The reason I said that, and the reason I brought up this book, is because prep time, if you go on Facebook, you'll find people saying, "Hey, I prepped for 3 hours, I prepped for 15 hours, I prepped for," oh my God, no. If you're prep for your table, I don't care if your table's going to be 6 hours long. If your prep takes more than 20 minutes, find a way to shrink it because you're beating yourself up for no reason. Don't do that. I guarantee your players do not care as much as you think they do. That doesn't mean they don't care, but they don't care like you think they do. Because if you're the host, then that means you're having to consider all of their energies and all of your energies and all of their theoretical plans, and you can't do it. You just can't. As soon as you have two players, just two, you're outnumbered 2-1. Think about it.
Yep.
So the more brains you add, and in theory, one human brain has an infinite number of possibilities. So what's 2 infinites, right? What's 4 infinites? You cannot possibly compete with that. So don't. Come up with an opening scene, and none of this start in a tavern stuff. Don't do that. You're on a ship and it gets hit by a meteor. Roll to swim. You're at the tavern and fiery imps explode out of all the metal tankards and shred the townsfolk to pieces. What do? Stuff like that. Have a big, strong opening number. That's it. That's it. Come up with an opening number and something for your players to do for the first. Give them a clear goal up front. There's a fight. You're gonna drown. My favorite is you all wake up naked, chained to each other, being slowly lowered into a dragon pit. What do you want to do about it?
Yeah.
Like, that one's a good time.
Nice.
Giving something to do right now. Get all the indecision they might have out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have time for that, because once they resolve whatever this is, they're going to take a second to go, and then they're going to ask you a bunch of questions like, is there a door? How do we get out of here?
Yeah.
But make sure that the indecision isn't the first thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Eliminate all of that. And while they're busy doing things you already know how to do, like roll dice to fight things, you'll have time to come up with a plan. If your prep time, you should never, ever, 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 ever prep more than the amount of hours you are playing, and preferably less than half of that.
Interesting.
Ever. Like you're beating yourself up for no reason.
Yeah. So this is fascinating to me because first off, it's reminding me of another discussion that I had recently, which was kind of like prioritizing the story and the experience versus prioritizing the rules and making sure you kind of strictly follow the mechanics of D&D, for instance. And now you're kind of bringing up this other element, which is having a lot of prep time, maybe making a really detailed, Tolkien-esque world with all of this backstory versus just having a base and then working off of that kind of in a flow. And to me, what that kind of says is that you're focused more on the players having fun, their experience, as opposed to making a realistic world that's believable and structured and stuff like that. And I don't know if maybe I'm misstating this, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it so far. And I think this is really fascinating because there's clearly two sides here.
I don't mean I should say that I should point this out before I start sounding like a jerk. Who's saying, while he's saying there's no right way to play, he's also saying there's only one way to play. I don't want to. So whatever works for your group,
Mm-hmm.
and if that means, and I do mean whatever works, if that means that the thing that works for your group is you all build the world together and we don't actually like roll dice until there's a 300-page book that talks about the backstory and the gods and blah blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
then that's okay. When I say whatever works for you, I mean it.
Yeah.
If that means that none of you roll dice, great. If that means you guys roll dice all the time, sure. If that means you like grease a pig in the front yard and chase it, and whoever touches it first gets to go first, okay. Like, I had a bunch of players I bought actionable socks to put on their hands so they don't have clean socks. We could do a sock puppet episode in the middle of a game once. That was a good time.
Wow. Interesting.
I gave them printed out scripts and everything. And a couple of them weren't like, they did it because they trust me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were concerned going into it. But by the end of it, we were all laughing and having a great time.
Yeah.
Like it was a movie. I told them what they were going to say. And I gave them what their character was like, right? I said, hey, this one's a super macho, right, kind of guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when that script was over, we went back to playing their normal characters their way, however they wanted. And the idea was that I presented them with world history in the form of their characters watching children role play out a sock puppet play of actual heroes in said world.
Mm-hmm.
Was a good time. Not my idea. That was Tracy Hickman's idea. He's a genius. But the point is that whatever outlandish, ridiculous, boring, silly, whatever adjective you have to describe whatever it is that your players have suggested, mm-hmm. give that a shot. If they want it, they'll think it's fun. Mm-hmm. Or not. Or they'll be like, all right, that was a terrible idea. Let's never do that again. And you'll still have a great story that will have brought you closer as people.
Yeah. Which
will in turn enrich the next thing you do together.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. Sure. Based on this, if let's say, the way that my the way I've set up this community is that we have meetup groups and we run newbie one-shots. And
meetup like meetup.com?
Yep, exactly. Meetup.com.
Okay.
So we've got some meetup groups and then people join those and then they get put into a one-shot game. And okay. I put quite a bit of prep time in that because I write out the story and then I kind of run them over and over and introduce people to D&D and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so for me, I write those one shots, I do a bunch of prep, and then I run them, and then I usually do some readjustments and stuff like that. Would you
Right.
are you saying that you would be comfortable, like, would you, if you were running the same sort of thing, you would just be like, have some kind of loose premise and then just go run a one shot and just kind of see where it goes?
I'm saying that if you produced yourself and 5 internet randos that I've never met before,
Yeah.
and you said, "Hey, can you host for us in 10 minutes?" I would say yes.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And that's probably where a lot of DM, like, or at least for myself, like, that would be like I would be pretty anxious to do that. I would be like, oh my god, I don't, because I could just imagine the million questions that they're going to ask about the world and the situation, and feeling like I'm not going to be prepared enough.
They might not ask. Think about it. They are just as likely to not ask as they are to ask, which is how come I have 2 different sets of world building questions. One of them is 27 pages, and one of them is, I think, 20 questions written from the perspective of your average player. Your average player wants to know where the tavern is, where the nearest mythical loot is that they might go find. Is there an arena I can join? A secret society I can be a part of? Like, lots of the average player probably doesn't care what shoe size that goblin is, unless he's going to outfit it with plate mail because they bonded with it.
Yeah.
So that question's on there. If I just, where can I get fancy armor made for this weird one-off monster I befriended that is totally not regulation plate mail size? And then you ask the players to answer those questions. Do their characters know where the mythical treasure is? The lost treasure? Well, of course not. It's been lost. But ask your players where it is and what it is, and they'll decide. And then you plop paint the world with them.
Oh, interesting.
Say, hey, obviously on a meta level, your character, maybe your character does know. Maybe he's an ancient scribe, and much like Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series, he actually did all the work, and he totally knows where Shangri-La actually is. Granted, he blew it up at the end. Spoilers. But he knows where it is. Yeah. Because before you blow it up, you encounter, what's his name? Lazarevich, the big scary bald guy. Okay. Who has all of Marco Polo's books, all of them, because he paid top dollar for them. You don't play Lazarevich. He's at most the villain of that game, which is to say still an NPC. And when the game starts, he still knows more about a mythical lost treasure than the main character does. So there's really no reason how come your characters can't, for whatever reason they come up with, they can't know how come where the lost treasure is. They still have to go get it, don't they? There's an adventure in that. Have them build the world. You'll get massive emotional stakes out of it when they determine where the nearest tavern is and what it's called. Who the richest, here's a question in there. Who's the wealthiest person in the world? Who's the strongest fighter in the world? Obviously, who's the most impressive mage in the world, right? Have them answer those questions, and they'll build the world with you. As opposed to asking your players, hey, what do you want to play, Tolkien or Witcher? Those are closer than, hey, those are more specific than, hey, what do you want to play?
Yeah. But
they're still not as specific as building the world one question at a time, and you don't need to get real specific if you don't want to. I'm a sucker for a sword and sorcery story. Big Conan-esque warriors fighting mages that are absolutely more powerful than them from thousands of miles away. But if Conan gets his hands on that guy, he's toast. Right? Like big dried out areas where the world is dangerous and the people in it maybe aren't worth saving. Like sword and sorcery worlds aren't the coziest places in the world. But as a host, I can pitch all those things to my players. But if they don't know who Conan is, which is very possible, if they haven't done the research, right? I don't have the expectation that they know as much about story development as I do, because I'm the host and they're not. So it was my job to go look those things up. It isn't their job. I deliberately took the job so they don't have it. So if they did the job too, great, but I don't have the expectation that they have. So as opposed to saying, hey, what genre you want to play in, high fantasy, dark fantasy, they might not know what that means. So instead, but they know what a bad guy feels like. So have them paint a villain in your world. They don't have to run into him today, and they don't have to run into him next week. And who knows? Maybe they want to play that guy once they're done, designing him.
Yeah.
Have them make the world with you, and you'll all end up closer to what you want. Like a video game
Yeah.
tells you what the rules are. If you sit down to play in a game of D&D with somebody you like the same guy with the 27 pages, and he had more questions for me. His best friend in the whole world kind of screwed him over with a tabletop game, and he was surprised and really hurt by that. And they've gotten over it. They're still friends. They're still best friends. They don't play together anymore. And that happened because player A and host A had different expectations of what a specific thing meant.
Gotcha.
That could have been completely avoided if they built the world together. And that he wouldn't have that negative experience that now pushes him towards things like Burning Wheel, which has 600 pages of straight rules. Like that. Oh my God. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm rambling. The point is, talk to your players, and if they can't just tell you what they want, ask little specific questions as a group, and they'll tell you what they want. Why guess? Everybody at your table, in theory, is here for the same reason, to have fun. But fun is subjective. Some players think beating the bad guy is how they win D&D, and that's fun for them. Other players like exploring every lost hallway, and that's their version of win, right? And some players like to just meet all the NPCs and keep a lore book. I had a player who tried to have sex with as many characters as he possibly could, and actually had a little notebook like where he wrote down their names, a little check. Every time he met an NPC, he put their name down, decided whether or not he wanted to sleep with them or not, and then went from there. So every player does have a thing. While D&D is a social experience and not strictly speaking a game, every social encounter you've ever had, you had a specific thing you were doing. Were you just passing time? Were you trying to get the boss to give you a raise? Were you trying to get your coworkers to see you positively? Social interactions are things with objectives, even though they're not games. So at the table, that doesn't really change. So your players have something that feels like winning to them, and probably something that feels like losing, or at the very least will bum them out. If you've got a player who loves exploration, and the only place he ever goes is a dungeon he's already been, because that's where the other players talk him into going, he's bummed. So as opposed to guess what kind of players you have, ask them. Build the world with them. The player who keeps talking about faraway places, he's an explorer, right? Like that's what he wants. And he probably wants to have to work his ass off to get to those places.
Is there a name for this approach? Because I feel like the sort of default that people approach this as is like, because when you buy like published books, they give you a story that you run with a bunch of details. When you play video games, structure, that seems to be the default, right? But you're describing something different. Is that like?
So at the table, I like to call that collaborative storytelling. But if we're going to talk about agency, you make a great point with the video games. So have you played any of the Elder Scrolls titles? Skyrim is the most recent one. Okay. Compare Skyrim to did you play the Darksiders video game?
No, not Darksiders, no.
God of War? Prince of Persia?
I've played God of War, and I don't think I've played Prince of Persia, no.
Okay. Which God of War did you play? It doesn't really matter.
The PS2, what was the one on the PS2? Was that the first or second?
There are two on the PS. I think there's at least two. God of War 1 and 2 were on the PS2.
Yeah, I played one of those.
And there's a couple of spin-off. Okay. So God of, assuming it was the first one, the one where you fight Ares at the end, that story is big and sweeping and epic and awesome, and it happens the same way every time. It is a linear action game that is absolutely worth replaying. It has lots of replayability. You can fight the bosses and the bad guys any way you want. You can blast them. You can hit them with the Blades of Chaos. You can just run past them most of the time. You have the agency to choose how you win, but you do not have the agency to choose the goal. You will clear these bad guys out of this room in order to make it to the next room. The final boss is Ares, whether you like it or not, and you have to kill him whether you like it or not. Most of the time, they give you the agency to choose how you achieve the goal. God of War is fairly limited in that regard, in that it will be violent, right? You're not going to talk your way out of it. Compare that to Skyrim, where they give you the agency to choose the goal. You do not ever have to engage in the Civil War, ever. You don't. Assuming you don't have a mod for that, you do have to be the Dragonborn. But aside from that, actually, to a point, not even that, because if you never go to Whiterun and then deliberately exceed the quest line to the point where the dragon blows up the watchtower, you won't know you're Dragonborn, right? So you can live out your entire gaming experience as a potato farmer or a druid who lives in the woods, and you'll still gain experience and slowly eke out your days as an NPC if you want to. Think about how many video games let you do that. There aren't a whole lot of them. This in turn means that Skyrim and other Elder Scrolls games are enormous and buggy as hell because of all the moving parts. But what the difference there is that one is a focused narrative. God of War is a cool story, but it's going to happen the same way every time. And the Elder Scrolls games, all of them, are big, and they give you the agency to choose the goal, which is not a thing that video games usually give you. The whole point of the tabletop is to choose the goal. If your players don't want to go get involved with the Goblin Horde, why make them? If they don't want to because they're afraid, that's one thing. If they don't want to because that sounds boring, don't make them. I mean, everybody's here for the same reason. So at the table, I like to call that collaborative storytelling. I like to tie them together. All right, you played a fighter, you played a druid, you've got a mage, and you've got an assassin. How do you all know each other? Like, do you know each other? I had one guy who swore another one a life debt. I had one player who made the bowstring that went to one of the other characters' bows. It snapped. They have, in an important moment, they have bad blood now. And characters are what they care about, not the dice. Superman isn't his powers. Superman is his love for the Kents and how much he cares about Metropolis. Think about it. He could guard any planet in the universe, and he chooses Earth. And within Earth, well, he does care about Earth. You and I both know he doesn't care about Gotham like he cares about Metropolis, right? Superman cares about that. Superman cares about Lois Lane. Superman sees red when he fights Apocalypse for reasons I don't understand. He really hates that guy, right? Like, those things are what separates Superman from Captain Marvel, who has a fairly similar set of powers, but is basically 10. So his desires are completely different. Like, Billy Baxter never ever is concerned with what the girl thinks, for example, ever. And Superman has entire plot arcs that revolve around him and Lois arguing, because he absolutely cares what Lois thinks. He's an alien he's an alien with incredible power, and he's often crippled by his perceived lack of humanity, though he is at least as human as the rest of us in that regard, because it cripples him. Like, congratulations, you have self-doubt. You're a human. So collaborative storytelling is what I would call it. It's what I usually call it. It's what it says on my business card. But I can't understate that enough. With new players, you might find it hard because that's like on the spot creativity. So what I usually do is I say, here's everybody's, here are 4 categories. Here are 6 categories. Each one has like 20 questions in it. I'm going to ask each of you a question from each category. Like this one's about sadness, and this one's about love, and this one's about fear. And if I ask you a question and you go, ooh, I don't know, we can pass you for now, though I will come back around. Or I can get you a different question. Like, lots of players just don't want to touch the love section at all, and they don't have to. I'm sorry, I really am just rambling at this point.
No, this is super interesting.
Collaborative storytelling. Get your players in on the joke.
Yeah. And the thing I'm reminded of as you're talking about is, from Matt Colville's YouTube channel, he talks about
I'm a big fan.
Verisimilitude. He brings that up in multiple videos.
Yes.
And the reading that I've gotten off of it is like, it's a living, breathing world that your players believe to be real, like, because of what's happening. But when you talk about a collaborative thing where they're creating stuff, my initial reaction is like, doesn't that sort of break that realism, because now they're creating stuff?
It's funny you said verisimilitude and realism in the same sentence. Those are not the same thing.
True. Yeah.
Realism is out here in reality. Out
Yeah.
here in reality, if I put my hand in a bonfire, my hand is going to turn black. I'm going to howl in pain and take what amounts to permanent damage depending on how long I shove my hand in
Yep.
there.
Yep.
I do not like fire. That is not going to happen. But I don't like fire because I have a reasonable expectation that fire will hurt me. It's a fact of life. Fire is hot. Don't put your face in it. If that's realism, the word realism comes from the word real, which is also in the word reality. So if something is realistic, it's like life. God of War, right? Kratos can lift incredibly heavy things and just rip harpies in half. And the things he engages in combat with every day are treated in his world as being commonplace. By the time that game is over, you will have killed hundreds of thousands of harpies. Have you ever seen a harpy in our everyday?
Right.
No, you haven't. A harpy has never flown by your window and attempted to scrape out your eyeballs. Which means that in his world, they're still not realistic. What they are is internally consistent, or they have verisimilitude. Similarly, if Kratos goes outside and he never sees a harpy for a week, there needs to be a reason, because for the last 20 years, he's been hunted by harpies. If tomorrow I walk outside and there's a bonfire in my front yard that emits cold and it's blue, oh man, am I going to have questions, right? Like, so I find that internal consistency or verisimilitude is different than realism and much more important. In a setting that has magic and dragons and kobolds and alternate dimensions and a plane that, if you're playing in the Forgotten Realms, a plane that's just fire, that's it. Like then who cares about realism? As long as your players feel like they have the planet underneath them, which is how come you need internal consistency. Otherwise, nothing is real and nothing matters, and your players will just have no ground and no bearings on what to do next. There is a little bit of verisimilitude built into your average adventurer package. Arrows hurt. Swords hurt. Maces hurt. All these things are realistic. If I stab you with an arrow, right, you'll bleed for it, right? And the average person needs to sleep. But in that same book are elves who don't really need to sleep. Not really, because they meditate instead. Like, that's okay, fine. I can meditate too, but I can't get the benefits of 8 hours of sleep. Like, so, but if in your world, dwarves, they don't really sleep so much as cross their legs, float up into the air in the lotus position 3 inches off the ground, and yell really loud for 10 minutes, and then they're good to go. If you meet and you establish that they need to yell really loud in order to rest. And as ridiculous as that sounds, roll with me for a second. If then you meet a dwarf who's a mute and he's always rested, well, hold on. As a player, I'm going to ask, how did he manage that when he cannot yell? And I don't care I am totally okay with the idea that dwarves float up into the air and bellow their brains out in order to regenerate themselves. But I will be confused when I meet a dwarf who cannot do that, who is like totally awake and functioning. Right. So I think there's a big difference between realism and verisimilitude, or if you don't want to sound like such a posh nerd, internal consistency. And I think those two things are very different.
Huh, interesting. Okay. I'm gonna have to spend some time thinking about that. That's super fascinating.
Sure. Matt Colville's a cool guy, by the way. He's very cool.
Yeah, I love his videos. Have you ever actually had a chance to meet him?
A little bit on his website. Like, we talk back and forth a little bit. Cool. One of these days, I'll actually get him on the show. One of these days.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
He's really cool. Guy Scandler's over at How to Be a Great GM. I did interview, and I might have got a little tiny bit fanboyish over it. I might have been less than professional, but independent of that, Guy and his channel are fantastic.
Okay, cool.
And he'll go over everything I just said in smaller, easier to digest lumps.
Awesome.
He's really cool.
Cool. Yeah, I'll check that one out. But otherwise, I think we just did about an hour and 15 minutes. That was awesome.
That does not surprise me.
That was seriously, that was great.
Oh,
Would
good.
you did you have any shout outs, or just why don't you let everyone know like where they can find you, what sort of things you're up to? Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I am on Roll20 a lot of the time. I don't tend to put out ads so much as respond to other people's ads. I have a Facebook group called Gathering of Gaming Goblins where I have reviews and one shots, and I'm also on Facebook at I think it's Jay Kennedy, also known as Baloo. Feel free to reach out, say hi. I don't bite. If you want to argue with what I just said, great. If you have more questions, that's cool too.
You bite me.
Huh?
You bite me.
My wife is over here going, I bite her. That's true, right? Like, but I don't bite other people. So, yeah, I occasionally just have Q&As with people. I have, as of right now, time to be determined seminars coming up to talk about ideology at the table, which apparently I don't have to do because I just did it right here.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. And if you want to, you can send the links over. I can put them in the video
do.
description so people can easily find you. So if you're watching on YouTube,
bet.
just look below in the description there. Otherwise, thank you so much, Baloo, for your time.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, this was fun.
This was super fun. Yeah, thanks everyone else for watching, and stay tuned for more episodes, and I'll just keep it right there. So thanks again, and see you guys.